Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's Scottish Family Party Live. Now, I was just saying to our guest this week, the other 3 weeks we've done this, every week when I've started presenting the show like this, the guest's been having technical problems, and I didn't know if they were going to turn up on screen or not. But this week, we've got not just one, but two guests who are ready and waiting to come to speak to you. So I'll introduce them just in a minute. I mentioned a few other things just while we're warming up here. First thing is, do share this. If you're watching on Facebook, you can hit share, or you can retweet, and then other people will be able to join in too. Just let you know about a couple of shows coming up in the future. We've got Tailed Feature. Some of you might know him, Scottish YouTuber. He's coming on next week. And we've got Dr. Stuart Wayton, who is coming on the 2 weeks after them. So I'm sure that'll be a fascinating chat as well. Just to say again, I've said this before, what we would really like on this show as well is sometimes someone to come in and disagree with us, someone from a completely different perspective to come in and debate. It's quite hard to find people to come and debate in Scotland. But if you know anyone, or you can encourage anyone to come along, then that would make for a great show, I'm sure. Right, I've been working on a YouTube video today about modern studies. It's going to be called Certificated Indoctrination. So if you're studying modern studies, or if you've taught it, whatever, look out for that video coming soon. Or if you've got kids in school, you'll see something of what they're being taught. You'll surely find that, I think, very interesting. One last thing to mention before I move on to our guests. We've got our online conference coming up on Saturday, the 14th of November. I'll put links in the various comments threads as we're going along. Right, moving on to this evening's guests. We've got two guests. We've got Belinda Brown, who's a Scottish Family Party patron. She is a researcher, a writer, a campaigner on social issues. I've made videos with Belinda before. She's very much involved with the Scottish Family Party. So welcome to Belinda.
Hello.
Nice to have you here this evening.
Nice to be here.
Like the headphones? That's
yeah.
great. And Belinda's going to be chatting to Katy Faust. Now, Katy Faust is the founder and leader of an organization in America called Them Before Us. And the basic focus of their work is the principle that kids ideally need to be brought up by a mum and dad. And she's based over in Seattle, and she's going to be joining us right now. So welcome to Katy as well. Katy, great to have you with us.
I'm so glad that we were able to make the time change work for everybody.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I'm going to really enjoy about tonight is there's going to be lots of talk about children's rights. Now, in Scotland, we get fed up of hearing about children's rights because they're normally taken to mean kids can do whatever they like and you can't punish them and no one's got the right to tell kids what they should do or whatever. But tonight we're going to hear a completely different perspective on children's rights, and a much more important one. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to disappear, so to speak, disappear off the screen. I'm still going to be here. I'll go and join in with the comments on the various social media platforms. I'll maybe pop up at the end as well. Before I disappear, just one more suggestion. If you do want to hit share on Facebook or give us a retweet if you're watching on Twitter, then that would be great. So welcome to Belinda and Katy, and I'll leave you to your discussion. Thanks.
Thanks. So hi, Katy. Great to meet you. Maybe we could start by, you could talk a bit about your organisation, Them Before Us, and tell us what it's all about. That would be great.
Yeah. So I got into the issue of marriage and family when we were debating the definition of marriage. And what I realized going through that is that really we've misidentified the victims in that conversation. You know, we made it sound like if adults don't get what they want, then they're the victims. But the reality is that when we get answers wrong to questions about marriage and family, children are the constant losers all the time. And that the state's interest in marriage really is not your love life, it's children, right? And so I tried to bring attention to children and how they need a mother and father leading up to the decision to legalize gay marriage in the United States. And during that time, I realized that every conversation about marriage and family, whether it's who goes on a birth certificate or whether or not same-sex couples have a right to adopt, or questions about sperm and egg donation and the legalization of surrogacy, and questions about divorce, those conversations were all dominated by adults. But kids are the ones that are paying the price because we are arriving at the wrong conclusions to those questions. And then when I looked around, there was nobody that was really advocating for the kids. Further, I learned that children don't just need their mom and dad. They don't just benefit from their mom and dad. They actually have a right to their mom and dad. Those are the two people to whom we all have a natural right. I mean, we don't even have a right to marry the person, you know, anybody that we want, right? Like, but we do have a right to these two people specifically, and it's the two people responsible for our existence. So when we look at every issue about marriage and family through that lens of a child's right to their mother and father, not only do we arrive at the right answers to all those questions, but we also mend a broken society. So we feel like this mission, them before us, which is to put them, children, before us, adults, should be the approach that everybody takes whenever we're discussing anything that has to do with marriage or parenthood or family.
And I mean, there are a lot of people who would say, look, you know, if a child's got two parents, two loving parents, you know, they point at all the dysfunctional families that there are, and they say, look, if a child has two loving parents, that's great, and that's all a child needs. Why do you feel so strongly, specifically, about a child having a mother and a father?
Yeah, because I really do want all children to be safe and loved, right? So that's what the other side says. It doesn't matter if it's two men or two women or a single mom or whatever. It doesn't matter if it's sperm donor, egg donor, right? We just want kids to be safe and loved. Well, we don't have to guess at the factors that lead children to be safe and loved. We've been studying family structure for decades. And what we know is that a child's best shot at being safe and loved is being raised in the home of their married mother and father. And anytime you step out of that design, out of that framework, risk factors for abuse and neglect and instability skyrocket. So I'm all for children being safe and loved. But if that's really what you think, then you're with me. You believe that children should be raised by their married mother and father.
Right. Okay. And I mean, what about, you know, children? I mean, some children don't have that option. They grow up in, you know, they don't have the parents. They need to be adopted. I mean, you know, what about situations like that where, you know, they can't have their mother and father? You know,
Mother and father loss has been around since the beginning of time. We used to experience generations of fatherlessness after war. We used to, before modern medicine, children used to lose their mother during childbirth. And throughout history, we've always recognized that as a tragedy and sought to prevent it. But these days, children are not experiencing mass fatherlessness or mass motherlessness because of war or because of maternal death. They're experiencing it because adult desires are being prioritized above children's rights. So we are in a whole nother epoch of history, not only where kids are losing their mother and father because adult desire is being prioritized above their rights, but now we're calling it progressive. Now we're celebrating. You know, in all other scenarios throughout history where a child would lose their mom or lose their dad, we would mourn with that kid. But now we're changing laws, we're changing policies to endorse and incentivize that kind of mother and father loss. And that's an injustice.
I often kind of wonder, I mean, I can see the change that you're talking about, and it's, you know, it's very much about parents wanting to have children. And I'm kind of wondering, when did that change? Do you have any ideas how that change came about, that it became so much more about what the adults wanted than the children's interests?
Well, I think a lot of people will point to gay marriage and they'll say, okay, well, now you've totally redefined marriage, you know, and that's not what marriage is supposed to be. And that's true. But the redefinition of marriage and family did not begin with gay marriage, and gays are not responsible for the abysmal state of the family in the United States right now. really, legally, that all began with no-fault divorce, right? That began back in the 70s and 80s when we moved from an at-fault system saying you can't just dissolve this marriage unless somebody is at fault for abuse, abandonment, adultery, addiction. And in those cases, the courts would side with the innocent spouse and reward the faithful spouse. Well, then we moved to a no-fault divorce model, and people could end their marriages for any and every reason. And the problem is that divorce is a really big deal for kids. It's an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, that leads to other ACEs that ultimately impact a child's physical health, mental health, emotional health, ability to find and retain employment, and ability to form healthy relationships and maintain them when they become adults as well. So we greenlit the first redefinition of marriage when we legalized no-fault divorce. Something that used to be a permanent relationship, we now was saying, no, that's a temporary relationship, right? So we moved from this expectation of permanence now to this, well, you know, the marriage just exists to make you happy. And so then the gay marriage activists picked up on that and said, well, if marriage just exists to make you happy, being married to another man or another woman makes me happy. But we got it wrong with no-fault divorce and same-sex marriage. The state's interest is not how adults feel about one another. The state's interest is children. And children need a married mother and father for life.
But I think the state's interest should be children, but, you know, I think often the state's interest is in getting votes, and really what we need to be doing is getting parents to be thinking about their children, and you know, how do we change that? I mean, what I really like about what you're saying is sort of moving the focus onto the best interests of the children. If we put them at the heart, I mean, in a way, that's, you know, how we should be thinking about everything, and we don't do so. So that's I do like that perspective. And so what you'd say that, what impact do you think gay marriage has had on our understanding of marriage and parenthood? I mean, I appreciate that it didn't start, the change started with no-fault divorce. I quite get that. But how do you think, what influence has the gay marriage thing had, do you think, on our understanding?
Unfortunately, a radical impact. You know, at least when you had no-fault divorce take place, you still had an understanding that children had a mother and father, and they should probably be connected to their mother and father. But when you have the legalization of gay marriage, what happens is men and women, you know, husbands and wives become optional. But marriage is so closely connected to parenthood laws that when you make husbands and wives optional, mothers and fathers will become legally optional as well. And so I've got a article on my website, thembeforeus.com, called A Global Survey about how gay marriage has weakened the rights of children. And you can look at every country that has legalized gay marriage and seen that it has an impact on parenthood laws, specifically making mothers and fathers optional, right? You'll have different countries such as Spain, you know, that said, we're not even going to say mother and father on the birth certificate. It'll be, you know, parent one and parent two. Now in the United States, there's no political institution, legal institution, government-wise, that will even say that a child should have a mother and father, because now saying children should have a mother and father constitutes discrimination in many cases. So you've got, you know, different states scrubbing the words mother and father from their parenthood laws. What the other major shift that we're seeing is weakening the biological connection between parents and children, and saying this does not have to do with a biological connection. So for example, when Canada legalized gay marriage, they immediately stopped talking about the parent-child relationship as one that had to do with biology and simply talked about legal parenthood. Now, that's a threat, not just to children, right? Because really what that's saying is children belong to whoever has the money and means to acquire them. But also in Canada, there's no weight given to the biological connection in parenthood. It's simply the state deeming you the legal parent. And if the state deems, it gets to determine your parenthood by a legal status, it's a lot easier for them to take away your parenthood based on, a legal decision. So yeah, we have seen an incredible shift, mainly the move away from biologically based parenthood, especially in cases of reproductive technology, towards an intent-based basis for parenthood, and that's really just the buying and selling of children.
It's quite interesting, because something that I've noticed over the years is how few rights parents have, and as I understand from what you're saying, once we take away devalued biology, as parents, we can sort of completely lose our rights. Yeah. But I was wondering, in what other ways you feel that why do you sorry, my computer, hold on a sec, my computer's, but it's okay. In what other sorts of ways do you feel that biology is really important to parenthood? Why do you attach? I mean, I can see the legal thing, it's, yeah. But in practical terms, why else?
That's really important. It's an important question that all of us need to be prepared to answer. Really, it has to do with child safety and a child's biological identity. So first, let's talk about child safety. The most dangerous place anywhere that a child can be is in the home of a cohabiting, unrelated man. Unfortunately, the presence of mother's boyfriend or even mother's husband, that gives them a two-parent home, actually introduces statistically the most dangerous person in a child's life. Some studies have found that the presence of mother's cohabiting boyfriend is actually a predictor of child abuse. You can just anticipate that that could be a factor in the child's life. And so the biological father, statistically, even though there are cases of abuse by biological fathers, and those parents epically fail to put them before us, and we will condemn them ferociously. But when you look at statistics, the safest man in a child's life is their dad. And the person who poses the greatest threat to them is a man that's living with them who's not related. So biology is probably the greatest factor when you want to talk about child safety and child thriving. Obviously, there's exceptions to both of those. There's heroic step parents and there's terrible biological parents. But when you want to talk about the rule, if you want to stack the deck in favor of kids' safety and thriving, you're going to insist on both biological parents in the home, married, raising their children together. The second aspect of the importance of biology has to do with biological identity. We are seeing now waves and waves and generations of adoptees and children conceived through sperm and egg donation who are scouring the internet to find any kind of trace they can of their biological parents. And this is even, among adoptees or children created through sperm donation who have been raised in loving, heterosexual, Christian homes, right? That there's some aspect of their identity and personhood that only their biological parents can supply, and it seems to really matter to them. So we can't diminish the importance of biology if we care about kids.
No, it's and what about this? Because as I understand it, I think in the US, you've got very different surrogacy laws. Here in the UK, money is not allowed to change hands in the cases of if you plan to obtain a surrogate child or whatever. Whereas I gather in the US, it doesn't seem to have any restrictions, and a single parent, anyone can kind of effectively buy themselves a child. It's quite extraordinary. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because as a sort of warning to what can happen if you sort of open up this market. I mean, it's hideous market, children. It's just hideous. Maybe
you're exactly right. It's a marketplace, and there's quite a patchwork of regulations depending on what state you're in the United States, but there are several states where commercial surrogacy is allowed completely unrestricted. For the most part, fertility clinics operate regulation free. We have very little information about the children being born and how they fare afterwards. It is a Wild West, really. And so I want to answer your question by contrasting the fertility market and commercial surrogacy, especially, with adoption. So I used to work at an adoption agency. I am an adoptive mom. I am a supporter of adoption because adoption is an institution centered around the rights of the child. You have a situation, a tragic situation where a child has lost their parents or has had to be relinquished or was abandoned. And now that child has experienced a wound, and it is the state's role to best replace and supply what was lost. And in those cases, like my case, when we were adopting our son, what that meant is my husband and I subjected ourselves to background checks and financial scrutiny and physical exams and references and home studies and FBI fingerprints, criminal background reports, child abuse investigations. We had to be approved by our state, by the federal government, by the Chinese government, by the immigration services. I mean, there was so much vetting that takes place because guess what? Social workers are not fools. They understand that if you are placing a child with unrelated adults, you had better make sure that they are going to care for that child as if the child was born to them. And that is exactly why adoptive parents like me rightly undergo incredible vetting and screening. Also, in adoption, you are prohibited. You're prohibited from paying the birth mother directly because that is baby buying. Now let's contrast that with the surrogacy market, okay? And that's a market. So adoption is an institution centered around the rights and well-being of the child. Surrogacy and reproductive technologies are a marketplace that simply has to do with the desires of adults. There's no screening, there's no background checks. It doesn't matter whether or not you've got a criminal history. Nobody's looking. There's no psych evaluations, nothing. If you have the money, and you can put together sperm, egg, and womb, you walk out of the hospital with that baby. And so it is, in adoption, ideally, if adoption's done right, every child who needs parents will find loving parents and a loving home. But not every adult who wants a baby is going to get one. Some people should not be given children that are not biologically theirs, obviously. In the reproductive world, you will get a baby if you've got the money, regardless of your qualifications. So it's actually, the two are completely, it's just an inverse, mirror, reflect, like one completely opposite of the other. And so I try to spend a lot of time talking about this because it's good to support adoption, even though we recognize that it involves loss for children. But just because you support adoption does not mean that you should support surrogacy and reproductive technologies. The two are not the same. One supports children's rights, the other one violates them.
It's one of the things which I kind of wonder about is, we live in a sort of era when women have got so many opportunities. We've got so many rights. We can do whatever we like. Whole vistas have opened up to us. And yet there still is, despite all the opportunities, women really seem to want to have babies, like they want it and they, which I haven't myself experienced infertility. But I don't know if you could comment on that. I mean, I haven't, when you hear those women talking, I feel desperately sorry for them. And how do you feel about, reproductive technologies and so on, helping those sorts of women?
Great question. So because women are marrying later, because we're having children later, a lot of women are missing those peak fertility years. A lot of women are not able to find somebody that they're able to have children with. It's not an easy place to be, honestly. A lot of women are struggling with pregnancy for many reasons. I've got a friend who was struggling terribly with infertility, and she said, it's just like having your heart broken month after month. And, when you get in that place, when you're so desperate for a child, it's really all you can think about, and you'll do anything. You'll do anything to be a mom, and that drive to have a child is beautiful and incredible. And we have 100% need to empathize with couples, singles who are struggling to have kids. However, no adult emotion ever justifies sacrificing a child's rights. And we understand this, you know, when we look at the abortion issue, we need to empathize with women who have unplanned pregnancies. We need to empathize with friends who get a scary diagnosis or feel like they're not prepared for parenthood. We need to walk that road with them. Our hearts need to break for them. But no amount of adult fear or longing ever justifies sacrificing a child's right to life. So that's the approach we need to take with reproductive technologies as well. That no amount of adult longing or adult desire ever justifies sacrificing a child's right to be known and loved by their mother and father, period. So if you can use reproductive technologies in a way that doesn't violate a child's right to life or right to their mother and father, I say, you know, God bless you. Unfortunately, very few IVF options are going to honor those two fundamental child rights. We know that of lab-created children, only about 7% of them are going to be born alive. Many of them will be abandoned in the freezer. Many of them will not survive the thaw or the transfer. Many of them are going to be sex selected or deemed not viable or not viable enough. Even if you do implant a child, maybe, you know, 3 or 4, hoping that you'll have 1 or 2 that take and all 4 take, many times those children are selectively reduced, which means aborted between 12 and 20 weeks. So this is not a child-friendly industry. The reproductive market is not there to protect the rights of children. It is there to produce a child product, regardless of the cost to kids. They don't care whether or not it's a sperm or egg donor or a donor embryo. They are there to get a paycheck.
Yeah, yeah. So it's quite quite scary when you're talking about all those different. I haven't sort of thought of all those things through. One of the things I'm just, I mean, with you know, gay parenthood and same-sex parents. I mean, there's the question of surrogacy, and that's a whole, as you've been saying, that's a really painful issue. But I'm just wondering, how do you feel about, you know, same-sex parents with adoption or same-sex parents with surrogacy? I mean, are you happy for, you know, a gay couple to adopt a child? Is that, how do you feel about it?
So let's talk about reproductive technologies and surrogacy. Nobody should be using a sperm or egg donor or a surrogate. I don't care if you're single or married or gay or straight. It's always a violation of children's rights. And at Them Before Us, we expect all adults to conform to the rights of children, whether you're single, married, gay, or straight. Otherwise, the adult is really asking the kid to sacrifice for them. And in a just society, the weak should never be asked to sacrifice for the strong. But that's what happens in reproductive technologies. So any use of sperm or egg donor or surrogate, whether the surrogate is paid or altruistic, commercial, a friend that's doing it for you, no. You're always asking a child to sacrifice so you can have something that you want, and that is an injustice. So we have a article on our website called Yes, Surrogacy is Wrong, Even When Straight Couples Do It. And we talk about the primal wound that a lot of adoptees have experienced when they've lost their birth mother on the day of their birth, and how we've been able to measure maternal deprivation in infants, even when they're separated from their mother just for a day or two. No, it is unjust to ask children to sacrifice their birth mother, their genetic father. No. I don't care if you're the sweetest Christian couple struggling with infertility. No. Now let's talk about adoption. Now, like I said before, adoption needs to be a child-centric institution, one where adoption agencies must be able to evaluate which parents are going to be the best parents for a child in need. So some of the factors they need to consider are the gender of the adults, because men and women offer distinct and complementary benefits to child rearing, and kids crave that male specific or female specific love. They need to be able to consider the marital status. Married parents are simply more stable, and stability is one of those emotional staples in a child's life. So they should be able to prioritize married mother and father homes. They also need to evaluate, are these parents able to care for the child's special needs? Are they able to keep sibling groups together? Here in the United States, unfortunately, there's a lot of children who are in sibling groups, and it's important to keep those siblings together whenever possible. So is there a couple that can take on the entire sibling group? So there's a lot of factors that goes into making a child-centric adoption placement. And so our position is adoption agencies need to be able to prioritize married mothers and fathers. However, I know of situations where children have not been adopted by mothers and fathers because no mother or father was interested in them. In fact, I was involved with a case before I was a mom where two women were willing to travel overseas to adopt a child with significant special needs. And because I had a background in adoption, they asked me to go with them. And I know for a fact that this child had been passed over by several heterosexual Christian couples. And this little girl needed help. And she needed to be out of this third world orphanage. She was already older. She had already suffered because of this medical condition. And so I went with them. The adoption agency made the right placement. Yes, that little girl who's now in college, I'm sure, has struggled with father hunger, but she's in a better position. So if you want more information about that, you can go to thembeforeus.com. You can look at our position statement on adoption, where we talk about how adoption must always be child-centric. The adoption agency must be able to prioritize married mother-father homes, but sometimes, given the different variables, a same-sex couple may be the best placement for a child.
Sure, sure. And I was listening to, I found on your website there was a podcast where you talked a bit about the sex differences between mothers and fathers. I found that really quite interesting because, you know, I think that we kind of feel, these days we feel that the roles are interchangeable and, you know, women can go to work and, you know, that we're interchangeable, you know, mother and father. And but from what you're saying, that doesn't seem to be the case. How do you see the differences between men and women when it comes to parenting?
Yeah, there's wonderful, beautiful, critical differences. I have a book coming out in February. We have an entire chapter called Gender Matters, where we go into the brain science and the hormonal differences, and then the way that that plays itself out in parenting. So to put it in a very, very brief kind of nutshell, men and women, we've studied this, men and women differ in the way they relate to their children, in the way that they talk, in the way that they play, in the way that they discipline, in the way they look at their kids and prepare them for life. I mean, it's incredible. You know, you've got moms that are we tend to be very focused on the immediate emotional needs of our kids. Are you okay? Did you hurt yourself? And then dads who are always pushing their kids to go bigger and higher and take greater risks. But because the dad is the most connected to and protective man in the kid's life, he's always encouraging them to do it in ways that are not dangerously risky, right? Appropriately risky. And so it's such a beautiful, I mean, can you imagine, like, you go to a play, actually, I've seen this, you know, I've seen a single mom at the playground hovering over her kid, be careful, be careful, be careful. Are you okay? Are you okay? Right? And really that kid was totally okay. He needed somebody to say, I think you can make that jump. I really think you can do it. But mom was so focused on safety that child ended up having some gross motor skill struggles, right? Because there wasn't the parent in the home who was saying, let's run faster. Let's climb that tree together. You know, dads tend to focus a little more on appropriate risk taking. Talk. The way that moms and dads talk to kids is different. There was one incredible study that was done about how dads and moms read books to their little kids differently. And it's not that dad chooses different books. He reads the same book as mom. He just does it in a different way. They tend to use more voices. They tend to ask different questions. Dads actually, when they read to their kids, push a kind of cognitive development that mom doesn't do, which is amazing. You know, mom tends to say things like, how many pigs do you see in the picture? And dads ask more abstract questions like, where do you think that pig got all his straw? I mean, it's incredible, right? Dads tend to read with more excitement. Dads, again, tend to have more rough and tumble play than moms. Moms tend to focus on the fine motor skills like cutting vegetables, and, you know, like drawing. Dads tend to do more roughhouse play. That kind of roughhouse play, it's hard to understate the importance to child development that has. You know, you can see it. It involves a lot of like, here's how to use your physical strength appropriately. And especially as boys get older, they need to have that stronger parent to really have a physical check against as they're growing up. So, you know, it amazes me that we talk about the importance of gender balance everywhere. You know, you have different countries that are saying we need to have a certain amount of women in our legislature, and California is talking about how you need to have female representation on every board. And I just think, why? Why does it matter, right? And if it matters so much, why did you destroy the only institution that gets the gender balance exactly right every time? And it happens to be the institution where that gender balance matters most.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point, that we talk about the need for having female representation at the highest political levels because of a different female perspective. And yet when it comes to the family, we think that, you know, mothers and fathers are completely interchangeable. We're both just parents and it doesn't really matter. So I'm quite intrigued by that. There's a question that's just come. Is it a question? Good perspective. I'm just going to read out. I've got a comment here on the screen. Good prospective parents are forced to jump through hoops for years in order to take a child out of our failing care system here in Scotland. But I'm pretty sure that if you told them in 2020 you were transgender, you'd have a kid delivered to you within a week. I mean, you know, that is. I think that points to, because I mean, I think you're absolutely. I really like what you say about adoption being about the child's interests. It's about, you know, finding parents for the child. But this comment that actually we're making so many, you know, hoops that parents have to jump through in order to adopt a child. What as someone who's worked in adoption, what do you think about the numbers of hoops? Do you think it could be relaxed a bit for parents who want to adopt?
I think that now, you know, when I talk with the social worker that I've been in pretty close contact with, she is saying right now there's so much red tape that it's making it almost impossible to do child placement. But that red tape, but it's not red tape to make sure that parents are safe, to make sure that people that want to bring a child into their home have cleared all of these background checks, that they've had references done, that you've had a social worker in their home. And so I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the United States, you know, I have a lot of friends who are foster parents and adoptive parents. To me, it feels like they go through pretty appropriate steps. I am hesitant to ratchet that back. I mean, yeah, if it's just red tape, then fine. But if it has to do with actually evaluating the fitness of the parents, 100%, that belongs in the process.
I suppose it tests the commitment of the parents to, you know, parenting a child, that they have to, you know, that they're prepared to go through all those hoops in order to, you know, but I just sometimes wonder, I mean, I totally get what you're saying, but I sometimes wonder if decent parents do get missed out. We heard of a Christian couple wanting to adopt. We heard of a Christian couple wanting to adopt who were made to get a letter from a gay person to say that they were not homophobic. I mean, it's, yeah, well, it's.
Yeah, we have to be careful. I know there's a lot of agencies in the United States that are rebuffing challenges that would compel them to place children with same-sex couples. And again, we support adoption agencies prioritizing married mother and father homes. But yes, we need to be careful that we are not providing some kind of ideological test, you know, for parents to be able to adopt. And there's a lot of agencies and a lot of incredible parents. In fact, Christian parents outnumber non-Christian parents probably 2 to 1 in terms of the people that are adopting children, especially when it comes to high needs children. You know, the adoption group that I was with when we went to China was all adopting special needs children, you know, biracial special needs children. And I'd say 12 out of 17 were professing Christians. You know, these aren't adults. These aren't parents who are like, I'm infertile, you know, I want a baby. These are parents who said, you know, I understand these kids are in need, and if not me, then who? You know, adoption is not a way for adults to get kids. It is an institution to provide parents to children who have none. And you need to evaluate the fitness, not the ideological purity, you know, according to the state when you're placing a child.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the things that we could do to kind of draw more attention to children's interests, to make that the focus of everybody's concern, you know, to move away from, because I do think it does tend to be what we as adults want, you know, even sort of the decision to have children. I mean, even, you know, in a way, you don't even necessarily have to go through surrogacy. It sometimes seems to me, maybe this is a bit cynical, but it sometimes seems to me that people have an almost, you can have your own children and almost have a commodified attitude towards children. You know, now I want a child, I've got this, I've got that. Maybe that's really cynical of me, but I don't know. I don't know if you have any comment on that. Maybe that's just.
Well, I think that the best way to shift the conversation from what adults want to what children have a right to is to tell the stories of kids. You know, we've always had the best research on our side. The pro-marriage people have always had mountains of data pointing to the fact that children thrive when they're raised in a married mother-father home. But data doesn't really change the heart. What changes the heart is story. And so one of the main things that we've done at Them Before Us is we have collected the stories of kids who have lost a parent, you know, based on desire, you know, so not the kids who have experienced parental death, because you can't prevent that, but all of these kids who are experiencing parental loss because adult desire was prioritized above their rights. So children of divorce and abandonment, children with LGBT parents, children created through reproductive technologies. And so go. I mean, I dare you. Go read their stories. And when you do, you suddenly go, wait a second. I'm not against divorce because I'm against those adults. I'm for children. So I have to be against no-fault divorce, right? Or, you know, you read about kids who are conceived through sperm or egg donors talk about how they go to sleep and they just fantasize about their missing parent. And they say, I wonder if she knows that I'm alive. I wonder if I've ever passed her on the street. Do you think that she looks like me? I wonder if she plays the piano like I do. I mean, these are kids, they talk about, you know, fantasizing about this when they're 11 and 12 and 16. And they're raised in loving homes a lot of the time. And so, like, once you read their stories, once you really see how they are impacted when adult desire is prioritized above their right, you can't unsee it. And I have so many people that will write me, you know, send me Facebook messages or send us emails and say, I just never thought of the kids before. You know, I used to see these stories about a same-sex couple who really wanted a kid, or maybe it was my gay BFF, and I really wanted him to have kids because he would be a great dad, and he probably would. But then I started reading the stories of kids who were intentionally motherless, and I suddenly went, wait a second, I can't support that. And it's not because I'm against my gay friend, it's because I'm for kids. And so it's the stories that change hearts and minds. the problem is these stories are very expensive for kids to tell. Like if you're going to tell a story about how painful it was when your dad transitioned to become a woman, that doesn't get you invites, you know, extra invites to Thanksgiving dinner, right? That's going to cost you some of the most important relationships in your life. And so we've really tried to provide a safe space, oftentimes a place where they can share their stories under a pseudonym, so you can look good and hard at what it was like when the mom came out and decided that she wanted to leave the dad and get into a same-sex relationship, you know, or what happened when dad ran away with the secretary and left mom there with the 3 kids, and how that's still impacting, you know, this boy, even though he's 45-year-olds with kids of his own. I mean, like, we have to, number one, rightly identify the victims, and that's kids. And number 2, we need to humanize them by telling their stories. So I would just encourage your viewers, go to the website. The stories are linked right on the homepage, and take a look. Take a look. You know, kids experience a lifelong wound when they are intentionally separated from their mom or dad.
You're really passionate about this. I'm just wondering, how did you get into this area?
So honestly, the other side radicalized me. I'm really just I'm a pastor's wife. I'm a mom of 4 kids. You know, I have a history in adoption, but I also have a history working with youth. And I watched, and, you know, we would do youth group events, and you would get these teens who, when, you know, everyone else is asleep on the gym floor all around you, they're up at 3 a.m. and they want to talk about the thing that pains them the most. And it's always, where's my dad? Or, you know, my mom is on the street using drugs, and all I can think about is, you know, does she ever think about me? And so this idea that kids don't care is such a lie for anybody that's had close contact with kids. But what I heard from the other side when they started to advocate for same-sex marriage is kids don't care. They don't care if they're missing their mother or father. They love being motherless or fatherless. And so I went, that's insane. Like, what you're saying is insane. It goes against everything that we know about kids, if you've ever spent time with a kid, or if you've ever been a kid yourself. But the other thing is, they started to say, you're a bigot, you're a hater, right? The only motivation you could have to support marriage is because of you're homophobic. And that, it radicalized me. I guess that's the only way I can say it, is I'm like, okay, all right, okay, you want to go? Let's go. Let's go. Come on.
How do you feel about that when you get accused of homophobia and hate speech and all the rest of it? Because I'm sure that will happen a lot in the area.
Oh, yes. So, like, the backstory is, I actually, the very first time I started writing about this, it was under a blog called Ask the Bigot. I was like, okay, I guess that I'm a bigot. You know, if that's it, if it doesn't matter how many stories I have, how many studies I have, how many gay people that I love, it doesn't matter that I've got better research than you. If I don't agree with you, I'm a bigot. Okay, so fine. Here's all of my reasons. You know, here's my whole platform, advocacy. And, you know, what started as an anonymous blog, that was the beginning of me realizing, oh my gosh, no one is speaking up for the kids. No one. So that's kind of where we started.
Yeah.
And also, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate being called a homophobe. I hate being called a hater. I love to be loved. And so it's really uncomfortable to do this, because I don't like the pushback. But at some point I'm like, well, I'm not the best person, but somebody needs to do it. So I just want to say, for your viewers, because I know you totally understand this, it's so uncomfortable to speak up about these kinds of things. And it's not like those of us that are doing it are immune to the pain of those kinds of accusations, but you need to do it anyway. You simply need to do it anyway.
What about your own background? Do you have do you come from a nice sort of cushy family, or what's your
yeah, that's so funny, because that's usually the question that interviewers lead with, if you've seen any of my other videos. But the short story is, my mom and dad were married until I was 10. and then they divorced. And then I split time between the home of my dad and my mom. And thankfully, I always had a good relationship with both of them throughout my life. My dad dated and remarried. And shortly after their divorce, my mom fell in love with another woman. And so they've been together as a couple for more than 30 years. And when I lived at her home, it was in the home of my mom and her partner. So I always tell people I don't consider her partner to be my mom, but I do consider her partner to be my friend. So I've always known, you know, that you can say moms and dads matter and not hate your gay family and friends. I mean, that's most of us. Like, I don't know if I've ever met a supporter of traditional marriage and a children's rights activist who hated gay people. It's just this terrible, terrible lie the other side uses to smear us, and it's false. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why I got into this is you're just lying. You know, you're lying about people to try to, you know, smear them.
No, it's so what are your, I mean, what are the sorts of things that the practical steps that people can take to try to draw more attention to children's rights? What should we be doing? And
Well, it's simple, a simple answer, not necessarily easy. My answer to that is become an expert. You should be able to have compelling, secular, child-centric responses to all of these questions about marriage and family. I have a book coming out in February that lays the case out. I mean, you read that, you're going to have more stories and more statistics to confront all of these different issues that are coming down the pipe in terms of marriage and family. Children need defenders. They need defenders, and it's going to be you and me, because the politicians aren't doing it, celebrities aren't doing it, the school system's not going to do it. It really just falls to ordinary people.
I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, the gay lobby would argue that the data shows that children are just as happy with, you know, two same-sex parents, and that they don't specifically need a mother and a father. What would you say to people who'd argue that?
I'll give you the answer and then let you know that on our website, there's an article called Study the Studies, where I break down everything I'm about to say if I go too quickly. So this is my typical response to that question. I'd say, okay, whenever you're not studying same-sex parenting, sociologists overwhelmingly agree that, number one, men and women offer distinct and complementary benefits to children. Number two, biological parents tend to be more connected to, invested in, and protective of their kids. Number three, losing a parent inflicts trauma, regardless of how that loss takes place, right? So you look at those, sociologists agree about all of that. But then suddenly, when you study same-sex parenting, where you're missing the gender balance, right, where you've always lost at least one biological parent and you have a non-biological parent involved, and you, what was the third one? Oh my gosh. So, right, so you've got biology matters and gender matters, and there's loss, right? So a kid's always lost, they're always missing a biological parent, they never have the gender balance they need. So somehow the kids fare exactly the same. Okay, so that's a problem. So something's not right there. And what's wrong is that there are serious methodological flaws in most of those studies about same-sex parenting that say there's no difference. So here's another tact if you want to approach it differently. Children of adoption who are raised by heterosexual couples do not fare as well as children raised by married biological parents. Donor-conceived children of sperm or egg donor, they don't fare as well as children raised by their married biological parents. Children of divorce and remarriage do not fare as well as children raised by their biological mother and father, right? So those are the only three ways that gay couples will have children in their home, right? Either because there's been a divorce, or they've adopted, or they have conceived through sperm and egg donation, right? So even though the kids in those three situations with heterosexual parents don't do as well, somehow in homosexual homes, they do just as well. Right. So there's something really fishy going on there. And it's that when you actually look at the studies, they tended to use very small sample sizes. They oftentimes recruited their participants rather than finding them at random. They didn't use adequate control groups. And there's a lot of problems there. I mean, it defies common sense for a reason. And it's because the studies, I don't want to say they were rigged. I'm just saying that they do not present a compelling statistical case. So there's more on the website. Study the studies if you want links and details.
I'll have a look at that. It's interesting because when you're talking, I really start seeing that, you know, if you're a child who grows up with your married biological parents, that's like the most privileged thing you can have. I mean, compared to, there's so many alternatives to that, but that seems to be the thing that produces the best outcome, you know, to have married, grow up your whole childhood, your whole life with your married biological parents. And I guess it's something that's just happening less and less, and we're not perhaps drawing sufficient attention to all the problems and disadvantages that happen when you don't.
That's right. And I would say for your political party, right, the Scottish Family Party, you guys are right. You are right to make this the central plank of your party. Why is that? Because if you're not advocating for a strong family, if you're not advocating for moms and dads raising their kids together, you're going to get massive increases in teen pregnancy and teen homelessness and teen suicide. You know, 90% of homeless kids don't have a dad. Like 67% of kids who attempt suicide or who are suicide victims didn't have a dad. You know, teen pregnancies, like 61% of those kids don't have dads. 75 to 85% of kids in like youth incarceration facilities don't have a dad. You solve zero social issues if you cannot first defend children's fundamental rights in the home. So all those other parties that want to throw countless dollars towards increasing education outcomes or increasing child mental health, guess what? If you're not also defending children's right to their mother and father, you are throwing money down the toilet, right? Because that's the real root issue.
I mean, I would completely agree. That's, you know, that's very much how I feel and where I'm coming it from. You know, if we want to have a more equal society and, you know, better outcomes, it's the family that we need to focus on. But it's a real, you know, it's a real uphill struggle. I mean, just here in the UK, we've recently made no fault divorce even, you know, we've made it even easier, you know, and we're introducing, you can just do it online. I mean, it's terrible. So it's like, we can see, you know, we need that family is what will produce the best outcomes. If we want fairness, if we want a more fair and equal society, that's what we need to build. But trying to get the lawmakers to take that seriously is very difficult. And unfortunately, they, you know, we need adults to realize, voters to realize that it's the children, you know, we've got to put children's interests first. So I love your perspective and the fact, you know, you're a children's rights advocate. You know, I've kind of been a men's rights advocate, but a children's rights advocate is kind of really what we need, you know, and, you know, all power to you. You know, it's great that you're doing this, and it's fantastic. And I'm going to go to your website and have a look at your studies and the data there, because that would be really useful. You know, where I think Richard's just
carry on.
No, I was just going to see, because I did have a list of questions which I didn't actually look at. If there's any questions, but I think probably everything that I had, we've kind of answered. Did you have any questions, Richard?
No, I've got a couple of things I'd just throw in before we finish. I would say to all the viewers, I would warn you that what you've witnessed here on this live stream would be a hate incident, according to Police Scotland. They recorded my addressing similar issues as a hate incident. So this live stream is one phone call away from being a hate incident. By the time Humza Yousaf's new hate speech law comes in, it could probably go one step beyond that as well. The two things I've taken from this for the family party, first of all, the children's rights angle, because there's such a children's rights obsession in Scotland. We've got to find a way of coming in on that. and sort of shoehorning this issue into those discussions. I think there's potential there to make quite an impact there. The other thing as well, I think we need to look at our policy on surrogacy, donation, etc. It's not something we've really addressed very rigorously in our policies so far. So that's something I think we need to have a look at. So then I would say, though, I had a chat with Katy a couple of weeks ago, and we are going to do some more communications of various sorts with them before us. So we're going to have some other videos, presentations. But I think tonight has been absolutely fantastic. It's reminded us of what we're all about in the family party. So great material, very inspiring and encouraging, I'm sure, for all of us. So thank you to Belinda for hosting, and thanks so much for Katy for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I pray that your influence grows leaps and bounds.
Right, thank you.
Thank you so
thanks
much.
very much.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thanks, Katy.
Right, thanks. So good night to everyone, and see you next week with Tailed Feature. Right, good night.
See you.